So I'm going to go back to the main file. In Visual Studio, it's called Mouse Project, the name of my solution or the project. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add the standard header that we have and then have the standard main body. All right, so in my header file, I'm just going to include the names of the three files, the mouse.h, the mouse.cpp, and this one right here. I am going to use pound include IOStream, that's CN and COut, but since we're not, and I also have to pound include the header file, right? Mouse.header, mouse.h. And since we're not using namespace std, we are going to be using std in front of all of our CN and our COut. So let's come down here and let's create some mouses. I'm not going to call them mice. So let's create a couple of mouses. We're going to create one called Mickey. And we'll create a mouse called Minnie. And then let's see if we can just print them and see if it works. So in order to access the function, I have to use a class object. So we'll print Mickey first, dot, and Visual Studio is nice enough to give me a list of all of the accessible or the visible class members. So we'll print the mouse. We do have to remember to put the parentheses at the end. Let's print Minnie as well. So we'll print Minnie as well. We'll put the parentheses at the end and let's just run it and see if it is displaying correctly. All right, so if you'll notice it says at the top of my run that I am being constructed. That's because we put that print statement inside of our constructor, right? So we can see on lines 18 and 19 we are instantiating or constructing brand new mouses, and I can see through my print statements that the mouses are being constructed, and then I can see that we are given a default age, weight, and growth rate. The weight has a precision of 5, the growth rate has a precision of 3. So we have another function in there called grow. So how about if we grow the mouses? We'll grow Mickey first. So we're going to grow mouse. We'll do it again. And then how about if we grow Minnie? And then we'll print them both again. All right, it was unhappy that I was spelling it wrong. All right, the dogs have calmed down a little bit, so now I'm printing them out after I've grown. Looks like I grew the first mouse, Mickey, twice. He's 2 days old now. We grew Minnie once. She's 1 day old, but it's a little bit difficult to see which one of the mouses is which. What I'd really like to be able to do is overload that print function so that it actually receives a name so I can tell it which one of the mouse I am printing. So we're going to have to come into our header file, and in order to overload the mouse, I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it, and we are going to overload the print, and I'm just going to overload it. Remember to overload it. We need something that's different, string. I'm going to pass them a name, and because we are not using namespace, string is in the standard namespace. That means that I am going to have to say standard. String is in the standard namespace, so I have to tell it that it is in the standard namespace. And now that I am going to overload it as a declaration in the header, we're also then going to have to go into the implementation file, and we're going to have to overload it there. So this is my print mouse. I'm just going to see if I can make my life a lot easier by copying the existing function. I'm going to come down here and paste it immediately below, and we are going to overload it to receive a string name. Once again, we're going to have to tell it that it is coming from std. they're going to pass us a name, and all I want to do is now say name, name Mickey, right? We had the name, something like that. So now I just want to add name at the beginning of my print statement. So I have to make sure that I have updated my parameter. We're going to come out here and I'm going to add one more. So for the sake of time, I'll just copy that. And instead of age, I just need it to say name. And then we will change that variable to name. Should be that simple. So we did have to overload the function declaration in our header. And then we also had to overload the function definition in our implementation file or the C++ file. So now if I come back to my main program, let's see if we can do it again. For the sake of time, I'm just going to steal those two print statements. And this time I'm going to use the overloaded one. So this is going to say, this is Mickey, right? And this one I'm going to pass an argument as Minnie. And then we're going to run it, and we'll see now if it makes it a little bit clearer about which one of the mouses we are looking at. Oh, there it is. So now I can see that we have Mickey and Minnie. I probably should separate these runs just a little bit because they're all kind of running together. And the way that I could separate those runs is if I come back down here, we could force a new line. Looks like we are forcing a single new line after that, after we have printed it out. So it seems to me another option would be to force another end line. And that was the overloaded function. And I'll come back up here and force a second new line after the original. And then if I come back to my main and I run it again, let's see if it did kind of separate all of those runs and displays of the mouses. Oh, that's much better. Much better. All right, so there is one function that we have not tried out. So how about set the growth rate, right? So how about if we create another mouse? We're going to call this mouse Mighty Mouse. And we are going to set Mighty's growth rate. So the way that we access functions within a class is by using the name of a class object and the .access operator. And then we are going to set the growth rate. This does require us to pass something, so maybe I will change it to 4%. If the default is 1.5%, I'm going to change his growth rate to 4% because he's Mighty Mouse and he is lifting weights every day, drinking protein and lifting weights. So he's going to have a higher growth rate. And so then let's grow Mighty. And then we'll print him. All right, so we'll say mighty.grow. How about if we grow him a couple of times? So I'll copy that grow and we'll paste it, and then we'll print him. Mighty.print mouse. We're going to pass him his name, Mighty, and then we'll run it. There we go. Once again, it says I'm being constructed because we instantiated a brand new class object. It is called Mighty, and it shows us his growth rate is 4%, or is 4, and the growth rate. I should break out my calculator for test cases, making sure my growth rate is working correctly. Now, the last few that we should probably test are the setters, because we created some. Excuse me, they're not setters, they're getters, right? Because we already have a couple of setters in the set growth rate and the grow. Those are actually setters. And so we're going to use these getters. So I'm just going to print it out. I'm not going to capture the return value. We'll just print out the growth rate. I'll make that a string. Oops. Of the mouses. And then we'll force a new line there. And then we will just see out Mickey. I gotta spell Mickey right. And then we will say Mickey dot get growth rate is one of the getters that we created. And then we will force a new line. And then get growth rate. That is a function, so I am going to have to put the parentheses at the end of it. You should probably spell Mickey right. And then since I took all of that time and bad spelling, I'm just going to paste it a couple of more times. We'll change this to many, which means this needs to be many. I will change this to mighty. And I have a problem with eyes, don't I? Capital I's. We'll change this object to mighty. There we go. So let me run it, and we'll see if we have indeed just gotten individual instance variables. And I can see that Mickey and Minnie have the default growth rate. We had overridden, we had set Mighty's growth rate. So, I think maybe from the very beginning, I might want to be able to set Mighty's growth rate at the moment of construction. And so how about if we overload that constructor so that I can overwrite or set the growth rate when I am first creating the mouse. So we're going to overload the constructor to pass growth rate. So once again, in order to overload it, I'm going to go back into the header file. Here is my constructor. I'm just going to copy my constructor, and then we're going to overload this one to receive a growth rate. Which means that I just need a double, and I'll just call it rate. So this is in the header file. Remember, there has to be something about the overloaded functions, a difference in the parameter list. I'm going to go in the implementation file, our .cpp file. I'm going to scroll up until, there's my constructor. So I'm just going to copy it since I already have it. And then we are going to overload to receive a growth rate. And this time the parameter is going to be a double rate. We can call it whatever we'd like to, but this time in my initializer, instead of defaulting the growth rate to 1.5, I'm going to default the growth rate to the parameter that I received. So now I have a mouse with no parameters, and I have an overloaded mouse constructor with a parameter. So we should be able to come back into main, and we should be able to create one more mouse. As a matter of fact, I might come back into that implementation file, and instead of saying I'm being constructed, I'm going to say I am overloaded, just so we can see that we're using the overloaded constructor. I wouldn't normally put print statements inside of my constructors, but I just want you to see that we are using the overloaded constructor. So I'll come back up here. We'll call this mouse, I don't know, Jerry. Jerry was a mouse, correct? This time I am going to give Jerry a growth rate. Jerry is in the eat ice cream every 2 hours and cookies at night. So we're going to put his growth rate at 35%, and then we are going to print mouse. I will pass the name Jerry, and then we'll run it one final time and see if we have indeed overloaded our constructor so I don't have to create the mouse and then set his growth rate. I can initialize it or construct it. So there it is. It says I'm being overloaded and his growth rate is 35%. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to remove the set growth rate, because we could have a mouse in the swim every day in the spa, and then he goes to the Big Macs a day, and then he comes back to the running on a treadmill and back and forth. So I do want the user to be able to manipulate the growth rate. But it's really, really nice to be able to set the growth rate, override the growth rate at initialization or when the mouse is being constructed. All right, so it's your turn. Now that we have created a mouse class, there's a couple of things that I want you to do. First of all, it seems like a mouse in an experiment should probably be given a number. So I want you to add a number to the mouse class. You're going to have to modify not only the constructor, but I also want you to create setters and getters for that mouse experiment number. And then, because we celebrate holidays, right? And maybe we go home for the weekend, it is very inconvenient to grow a mouse one day at a time. You might want to go on a holiday. And so what I want you to do is overload the grow function to accept a number of days that you want the mouse to grow. It needs to be a number that is greater than 1 because our normal grow function automatically grows our mouse by 1. And as always, I want you to add instructions to main so that you can test the changes that you're making and include inline comments and test cases.